Welcome back, pro wrestling fans. Welcome back, IWC. It's me. It's me. It's the G.O.C. Coming to you live to tape 25 feet below the surface of the earth. Here for a special episode of Story Time with the Guardian of Chaos. Here on Chaos Corner on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. Follow me on all social media platforms, and you know what they are. At Big Daddy G.O.C. on Twitter, aka X, and the G.O.C. stands for the Guardian of Chaos. On Instagram, it's the Guardian of Chaos. On Facebook, there's two accounts. J Brony, just like it sounds for all you people with the brain of a dehydrated BB. And Prodigio Fidelis El Guardian in honor of my heritage. Follow me on Gitter, Gab, Truth Social, on Rumble. I cover it all in the IWC. Shout out to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, maybe an adult beverage, grab a snack, maybe some chips and dip or a nice sandwich, and enjoy story time with the Guardian of Chaos. It's a snowy weekend. We don't know how much we're going to get, how long it's going to last. I mean, I sound like somebody who's on a date. Something a woman would say to someone. Am I right? I mean, I was confused as a baby at Hooters. I'm certainly busier than a blow-up doll at a frat party. You guys get the idea. A little bit of levity. One man, unique, unedited, unscripted, raw dog for you, the fans. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. We're going to jump off all those other social media platforms and meet me back here on the YouTube channel, Guardian of Chaos. Leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, email me, inbox me, do something. And then come on back for story time. You're not going to want to miss this one. It's an extravaganza, a bonanza of classic, priceless, historic stories with your old buddy. Come on back. In WCW, I began what would be the worst 6 years of my life. It was more unprofessional than any place I had ever worked. I knew going in that it wasn't going to be the same as the WWF. I already knew guys who were there who had told me that it was real and really and run like a circus. I went there for the money and to be closer to home. The first week I was in the booth to do voiceovers for the television shows with Tony Schiavone. I watched a guy throw a drop kick and it missed by about 4 or 5 inches. Tony didn't say anything. I'd try to cover it up by saying, you know, Tony, a lot of people don't have the resiliency, and when they see a drop kick, try to get out of the way and move back. Cut, Tony would say to the production crew. He looked at me and said, don't cover it up. Don't bring any attention to it. Shows you the difference between the two companies, especially during the Monday Night Wars in the 80s and 90s between the WWF and WCW. Inevitably, the missed drop kick would show up in the highlights after the match. After a year there, I wanted to go back to the WWF. Around that time, I was calling a match with Brian Pillman against Eddie Guerrero at the Clash of Champions in January of 1995. I told everybody from the outset never to touch me. This was just a given. To this day, I have a bad neck. After my surgery in 1995, the doctor told me that he didn't know if my neck was stronger or weaker than it ever was. When I did TV, I never watched the ring to call the action. I watched the monitor. You have to call what you see. I saw Pillman outside of the ring and started talking to Schiavone. I couldn't see Brian at all. Pillman came up behind me and pulled my coat down over my shoulders. I didn't know if it was a fan or what. I stood up and said, "What the fuck are you doing?" I threw my headset off and started walking up the aisle. I stopped myself and thought, no. I'm going to finish this. Eric Bischoff didn't like what Pillman had done. I said, "Hey, you hired the guy. What's he coming over touching me for?" Pillman apologized too and said, "That's okay. You scared me. I didn't know who it was." They have since erased those tapes from everywhere. There is no record of it anyplace unless someone taped it the live broadcast. I honestly thought I was going to get fired for that. I didn't like the idea, and they didn't tell me that it was going to happen. You never felt wanted when you were there. You always felt like the foster kid from a domestic dispute who had to stay somewhere for a month. I made friends there who were professional and nice, but other than that, most of them were lucky to be working and have a job. They didn't have the training, the mentality, or the desire to do anything right. They were all very lucky to be with such a hillbilly company. I'm just telling it like it is. reading here from the story time, from the original, from the priceless Hall of Famer, The Brain. You guys have gotten that by now. Go back and check out part 1, times and his time in the WWF for story time here with the Guardian of Chaos. And now we move on to WCW. After production meetings in the WWF, Vince McMahon would say, let's go have some fun. After WCW production meetings, we'd say, let's go see if there's any free food left. But you'd go there and it would be all gone. People from production would walk by you and they would never say hello or talk to you. There was this makeup girl who was promoted to executive producer because she was taking it from one of the other producers, and I'll keep it clean here. She looked like Mount Rushmore and smelled like Grey Poupon. Think about that. She couldn't put her own face on. She was going to have to make me look good. And I know I scared her rats off cheesecake and make onions cry, but you guys get that. Nostalgia just ain't what it used to be. There was another girl that worked there whom we called Wendy Turnbuckle. She was just a slob. She was clumsy and always spilling water. She'd grab a rag to clean it up, and she'd pull our headsets off. One day I saw her at the airport. Apparently Wendy was a diabetic. No offense. She was lying on the floor of the terminal and gave herself a shot in her ass through the jeans. Of course, there was a croissant from Burger King lying next to her. Picture a big pig lying on the floor with needles sticking out of her ass. No offense, man. Kayfabe, it's a work, man. Don't be so offended. I leaned over on the guy sitting next to me and said, usually they use those dart guns. They'll take the tusk off right after they get them on her. Everybody hated their jobs. It was the funniest place. For example, if someone was in charge of tapes and someone was in charge of pens, the person in charge of tapes would say, don't touch that tape. I'm in charge of it. I have to move that. The person in charge of pens would say, would you like to use my pen? The tape person would say, I don't want to get involved in that. They would only do what they actually absolutely had to do. Not one would help anybody or the other. The production department wouldn't show replays with a guy coming off the top rope into a table. They'd show a guy locking up at the start of the match. They missed the good stuff. WCW always wanted to start a match in progress or show someone coming out of a limo. You don't see the Super Bowl start with a guy running the ball. You have to have an opening, and the announcers have to talk about what you're going to see. Set the stage for it. People who turn on wrestling and see a guy coming out of a car walking into the building, they think they've missed something already. They don't know where they're at in the show. Keep in mind, the only reason to be in the business is to draw money. Remember that. You do that by increasing ratings and selling more advertising time so you can get more people in the seats at the arena, something that's lost here in 2023 and now 2024. When the Cat, Ernest Miller, did his James Brown impersonation with the cape and the shoes, it was cute. People liked it. Someone got the idea to have the real James Brown come to the Cow Palace in San Francisco. They signed James Brown for $10,000 for one night. At the beginning of the angle, Miller brought out a James Brown impersonator. Cat claimed it was James Brown. A couple of minutes later, the real James Brown, watch yourself, sit back, kick back, y'all, came out through the curtain, and he got in the ring and did a little dance. And Miller acted astonished. Now, if someone is a promoter, a booker, a writer, and knew what they were doing in this business, the average moron would tell you that you announced that you're going to have James Brown at the show. You get him to come in a day early. Have him do some sound bites for the local radio stations. Hello, McFly. Anyone? I said this on the first episode. Bueller? No? Eric's idea was, Bischoff, if the people missed it, they would lay down the money for the next pay-per-view and buy it. But what he didn't know was that the secret to selling anything was to advertise. I say that all the time, even today at Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling, my home company. He gave away $10,000 for nothing. WCW even put the belt on actor David Arquette, which was a bad idea. But there was one nice thing about the whole situation. The money that Arquette made wrestling in WCW went to the families of the late Brian Pillman and Owen Hart. He didn't even know them. Everyone made fun of him, but they would have made fun of me if I had the lead role in Gone with the Wind. I don't belong in that part, and he didn't belong as champion, no matter how good the cause was. But that was WCW's philosophy. Double-cross everyone. Fool everyone. These ideas would make Good Morning America and the Today Show. They laughed at poor Arquette, and you never saw him on those phone commercials again. Goldberg was the hottest thing that WCW ever had. People were standing outside the building chanting his name. Mark McGuire came to Atlanta because they both liked to work out. Goldberg went to Fulton County Stadium, and McGuire ripped off Goldberg's shirt and rubbed his bat on it. That year, he hit 70 home runs. Vince McMahon would have had people take McGuire to the Louisville Slugger Company picking out the wood. He would have shown Goldberg working out in the same shirt before the visit. WCW didn't send anyone to the stadium because it wasn't their idea. They never wanted to take responsibility for those kinds of things. That's why you wonder the Monday Night Wars went on for as long as they were and was such a ratings bonanza. No one would make a decision on anything, and the decisions they made were bad. They made Kevin Nash the booker, along with Terry Taylor and some other guys, and Nash went out and beat Goldberg, the hottest thing that WCW had. Shake my head at that one. Nash shouldn't have beaten a man that was over like Goldberg was. The time to beat Goldberg was when it was time to pass the torch. Andre did that for Hogan. He let Hogan beat him. Plus, WCW needed to go all the way with Goldberg and build him up, but they didn't have that capacity. Nash always loved showing two guys fighting in the back, but the camera would cut to the back, cut back to us, and we would never comment on it. He had to do it like a television segment, as if we didn't know what was happening. When he would do something in the back, he would always clear out the hallway. He should have had people walking by to make it look normal. It's simple. Keep it simple, stupid. They always had fights in abandoned parts of the building. Why would they be in the part of the building or that part of the building no one else was there? When Goldberg's winning streak ended, that was the beginning of the end. That and the match between Hogan and Nash, where Hogan pushed Nash down with one finger and pinned him. All that with 40,000 people in WCW's own backyard of Atlanta, the home of the company. After that show, Mike Tenay and I told Tony that the handwriting was on the wall. He shot back with, "You bunch of paranoid sons of bitches. How are the Braves doing, Tony?" When I worked with Mike Tenay, we used to call his wife, Karen, Fingers. Any salt shaker on a restaurant table went home with her. Mike never took a bump for a living, but he did when Jeff Jarrett hit him with a guitar. Most of the guitars were gimmicked anyway. That one wasn't, and it hurt. I always wondered how many times Jarrett could hit someone with a guitar. He went through more of them than Johnny Cash. Today was the perfect guy to make fun of with all the knowledge. He had Lee Marshall, was hard to work with because he wouldn't come back on me like Monsoon did. Let me say that again. Tenay was the perfect guy to make fun of with all the knowledge that he had. Lee Marshall was hard to work with because he wouldn't come back on me like Gorilla Monsoon did. What he didn't understand was that I'm 6 feet, 230 pounds, and a sneaky coward, and I used to wrestle. Monsoon used to wrestle, and he was bigger than me, so I was playing the coward, and I had to back down from him. Marshall was just a dumpy-looking announcer. I couldn't be afraid of him and couldn't act this way or that way, just like I couldn't act afraid of Tony. But today was perfect. He would put me in my place with a whole bunch of words that had me confused. I would try to figure out what he would say about me, but I wouldn't fight him. Marshall was the kind of guy you'd want to hit. Guys like Gordon Soley you had to respect for and wouldn't touch. Gene Okerlund, too. I never liked guys grabbing Gene during the interviews. Some would say that grabbing someone as if you were really going to assault them takes away from your credibility. But that's ridiculous. If you're a masked guy who just ate a chair and teamed up with the Wolfman against two midgets and a woman in a cage, where's the credibility in the first place? I say that about today's business. Mike is a real smart guy. Everything I needed to know, I'd ask Mike because he eavesdrops on the wrestling world. He always did his homework, but was always dissatisfied in WCW. He would ask questions and people would just scratch their heads. It was fun working with Mike, and I respect him. And fingers, a lot. Wait a minute. Where's my wallet? Eric Bischoff hired Steve McMichael to be a color commentator because Bischoff was a mark for McMichael. Mark is normally a derogatory term. You guys know that. It refers to a wrestling fan who believes that the sport is real. In this case, however, it just means that Bischoff had a blind devotion to McMichael and ignored any of his shortcomings. Guys, pay attention. I hope you're taking notes here at Chaos Corner. McMichael was not a good wrestling announcer, and it's not because he wasn't a good announcer. For example, I couldn't do a hockey for a couple of reasons. First, I couldn't say the names. They look like eye charts. Second, it's very hard to do hockey because it goes back and forth very quickly. McMichael was a good athlete and a good football player, but he just didn't know what to say or when to say it when it came to pro wrestling. McMichael would say, "That guy is going to kill him," when you would never say that. I also think he found professional wrestling hard to get excited about and treat as a real when he came from the Chicago Bears in the Super Bowl. McMichael eventually became a wrestler. He debuted at the Great American Bash in 1996 when he teamed with Kevin Green against Arn Anderson and Ric Flair, whom I managed on that night. It was a match where McMichael turned on Green and joined Anderson and Flair. I didn't care how good in shape you are then. Whether you were a wrestler or a basketball player, you still can tell when a guy is out of wind. McMichael may have been able to play football all those years, but as I always say, pro wrestling is a lot different, and being in wrestling shape is a lot different than any of the major sports. A wrestler can blow up just from being nervous. I was outside the ring and I saw him on all fours sucking air. Just when I saw his stomach go in, I gave him a stiff boot in the gut and knocked the wind out of him. Back in the dressing room, he said, "Weasel, you got me." "You can't tell anybody that," I said. "You played 10 years in the NFL. You have a Super Bowl ring. You're going to tell everyone that I kicked you and knocked the wind out of you?" He never told a soul. I told everybody. Up until that time I arrived in WCW, I never heard a wrestler say, "Let's go out there and put on a bad show to screw the people." In WCW, I heard a couple of guys say that. And they had a bad match and they hoped they killed the town so they didn't have to come back. Let that sink in. Whether there were 1 million people in those stands or 50, just entertain them. That's what you're supposed to do. Right? You guys know that I know what I'm talking about here. The fact that there were only 50 people in the stands was not their fault. It was the promotion's fault because they're not good enough on television to get people interested to come out and watch live. There were so many factions in WCW. Kevin Sullivan was the booker one week. Then it was Kevin Nash. Then Terry Taylor, who would never tell anybody the truth. Jimmy Hart would help. Arn Anderson would try to do his best. Mike Graham would try as well, but no one was told anything. One group wouldn't talk to another group. One group kept secrets from another group. At Vince's production meetings, we would go over every part of what's going on. Anything to add? Anything to subtract? It would go on for 2 or 3 hours. I'd go to the WCW production meetings and they would read us a paper and that was it. I could read. Trust me. Sometimes we would go out there for television and we wouldn't get a format sheet until the second or third match. WCW would also try to do these ridiculous worked shoots. One day in the hall, Diamond Dallas Page got into a fight with Buff Bagwell. They both wanted everyone to believe that it was real, but they were working, fighting in a hall in front of the boys. Dave Finley, one of the wrestlers, and I were sitting there laughing our asses off because they were using worked punches. The idea was interesting too. When Paul the Giant White, known as the Big Show, fell off of Cobo Hall at Halloween Havoc in 1995, he came back for his title match with Hulk Hogan after falling off a 17-story building. Can't make it up. They were going to put a fish in his trunks and say he fell into the Detroit River. I told people that they expected him to fall off the roof, so they put airbags on the ground to cushion his fall. What else are you going to say? A guy fell off the building and came back for his championship match? No one at WCW knew how to promote the big man. He didn't know how to be a giant because he started taking bumps right away. Andre would never have done that, and he would never do that. The Giant was just a big guy who was an average wrestler. He was not a true giant. The Nitro girls were good. I didn't like them in the beginning because I didn't like Kimberly Page, who was married to Diamond Dallas Page. She had a bad attitude. She would say hi to you only if she wanted to. Before she was a Nitro girl, she was just Dallas Page's arm piece. When she became the Nitro girls choreographer, she wouldn't talk to anyone. I didn't care. One less person I had to bother with. The Nitro girls could dance, and they looked good, but they started making them into wrestlers. They couldn't work, and no one wanted to see them work. It's like Elizabeth and all the other female managers. You can't have a woman manager. There's no payoff. If a manager gets involved in a six-man, the payoff is the cage match. You can't throw a woman in a cage and get blood all over her, although in 2024, you know the bullshit that's going on with intergender wrestling now. It doesn't sell, it doesn't work for me. I'm just giving you my opinion. I give you the good, the bad, and the ugly here on Chaos Corner. And a man can't beat up a woman. Are you listening today, 2024? Today's promoters and promotions and workers and talent, are you listening? No one wanted to see a man slam Liz or punch her, but they would want to see them do it to me. A la the G.O.C. The WWF is a wrestling company that needs television to survive. WCW was a wrestling company that just happened to be on TV because it was owned by a television company. You see the difference there, right? We were the only thing making them money. We had better ratings than the Atlanta Braves, but WCW was always the whore sister of the Time Warner family. The kind that goes out every night, turns tricks, and makes money. The family lives in a big home, drives new cars, and dresses nice. But they won't tell you, and they won't tell anybody where they're getting their money from. We were making more money than any division of that company, but no one wanted to give us any credit for it because it was wrestling. WCW was like the city of the living dead. No one spoke and there was no camaraderie. The underneath guys didn't like the Mexicans. The middle guys like Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Eddie Guerrero were never going to get a break because Bischoff liked to use Kevin Nash and other big guys. Most of the people in WCW couldn't find their ass with both hands. I suggested an idea once on an angle with Cactus Jack and Max Payne. Eric told me, we do all that, you just stick to announcing. You're just an announcer. We do all that, was the quote. Bischoff, really? I said, fine. I never gave them another idea. It hit me. I would go in and get my check every 2 weeks. I had first-class airfare, expenses, guaranteed salary, medical, and I only worked a couple of days a week. I didn't care about anything. All I cared about was doing my job right and getting my money. I didn't care if a guy came out dressed like a goose. I just wanted to get out of there. It wasn't fun anymore. And when it's fun, you get out. And when it's no fun, it's hard work and it comes across. You guys know that. WCW was run by people who were not in the business. Sam Mushnick was never in the business. Neither was Dennis Hilgard. Neither was Wally Kerbo. But they knew how to promote. These guys in WCW wasn't their money. It was Ted Turner's money, kind of like how Tony Khan and TK's money in AEW in 2023 into now 2024. They didn't have any idea how much money they were making or losing, nor did they care. Sure, Nitro was number one for 83 weeks during the Monday Night Wars, but that was because of Vince McMahon. He was running those vignettes on Hogan being old and Savage being old. It made people aware of where Hogan and everybody were, so the fans started watching WCW. During that time, the announcers were criticizing the WWF product on the air. I never knocked Vince one time. Eric Bischoff asked me once, "Are you still working for him?" I said, "No, Eric, I'm not working for him. The reason I don't knock him is that I spent 10 years there. How stupid would I look to rip on the WWF? I'm hired by this company to put over this product. Sears people don't talk about J.C. Penney." One night, Vince had a pre-recorded Raw show against a live Nitro. The WWF switched their title that night to Mankind. Eric announced the finish and what was going on to happen and what was happening on Raw. His mentality was that people would know the finish and not want to watch it. Everybody watched it. Vince did a 7 that night in the ratings. We did a 2. Let that marinate. Bischoff was even challenging Vince to matches in the ring. If that match ever happened, Vince would have kicked his ass. Eric Bischoff was like every other guy that got into wrestling that didn't have the wrestling mentality or wasn't from the business. This guy was a kickboxer. I always called him Kung Fu Charlie. He won different colored belts for some strip mall doing taekwondo with a bunch of 11-year-old kids barely touching each other. Bischoff never did anything but kickbox. He threatened people. He was going to kick this guy's ass and this and that. I never had a problem with Eric. He gave me 3 contracts and 2 raises, but he just wasn't a friendly guy. He even admitted it when I asked him to go have a few beers with me. To put it simple, Bischoff wanted to be Vince McMahon. Vince is Neiman Marcus. Bischoff is Walmart. He just couldn't be Vince. He didn't have it. Maybe he does for other things, but not for wrestling. He told me one day, I'm going to put the stake in Vince McMahon's heart, pull it out, and do it again. The stake is located in someone else's body, and it's in a different area. Bischoff would say to me, you never took a company to the top for 83 weeks like I did. I've been on the top in a lot of companies for 36 years, not for a year and a half. That's success if you can do it for more than that. Vince has done it. Bischoff hasn't. They wouldn't tell us the finishes of the matches or the angles that were supposed to be on air. Bischoff justified that by saying, we want you to react like it was a shoot. I told him if it was a shoot, then you'd know what we would do. We wouldn't say anything. Because we'd never seen one in the ring, maybe it would be better to tell us so we can enhance the product. Hello? Bingo! We didn't even know that Hulk Hogan was turning at Bash at the Beach in Daytona during the summer of '96. They kept him in a car the whole time. We didn't even know he was in it. I knew he was there because I saw Brutus Beefcake, who was a longtime friend of Hogan's, and he was hanging around. They were so touchy at Turner, I used to make midget jokes when I worked for the WWF. Once I said, don't ever touch a midget, you never know where they've been. I saw the Haiti Kid doing sit-ups the other day under a 57 Chevy. Nitro had a Mexican midget battle royal. Eric approached me and said, don't do anything insulting. First of all, Eric, I said, you're talking not to Ray Heenan, but to the character of Bobby the Brain Heenan. There are 12 midgets out there with masks on. What is Bobby Heenan going to say? You can't? Midgets will write in? They can't reach the mail slot, I responded. Bobby, he said, be careful if you guys are following along here. What was I supposed to do? They all got in the ring, and the only thing I could come up with was, it looks like they're at a daycare center. I told Bischoff once that I could save him a fortune with the Lucha Libres. How, he asked. You're bringing 12 guys in from Mexico City, I said. Why don't you bring in 2 and keep 10 masks? They're all built the same and they do the same moves. No one will know the difference. Are you listening to AEW? Vince Russo took over Bischoff in October of 1999. That's right. Vince Russo took over for Bischoff in 1999. He said from the outset that he was going to hire actors. Anybody could do wrestling, he thought. He wanted to do everything in the business that worked and do it the opposite to see if it would still work. That mentality shows how well WCW was doing before the WWF bought them. Russo was the editor of the WWF magazine. Everyone talks about he and Ed Ferrara were writers for the WWF television. Truthfully, if they would give 20 ideas to McMahon, he would choose one and then turn around and do his own thing. Those weren't their ideas. Are you listening? Those were McMahon's ideas. Russo had no presence on television. He wore jeans and New York City t-shirts. He didn't look like an executive or the head of a company. Of course, neither did Eric. He started in WCW wearing suits, but then he became the boss. Both Russo and Ferrara snowed WCW into putting all their faith into them. They were getting $500,000 a year apiece. Russo didn't like me. He wanted a more youthful look, like an MTV look. So he replaced me with Mark Madden, a loudmouth slob from Pittsburgh who liked hockey. He shouldn't have been in that job. I was with the company for 6 years. I missed 2 days of work, one for my mother-in-law's funeral, one because I had strep throat. I called Tony Schiavone the day I was sick, and he said that's okay. But Terry Taylor went nuts. He couldn't wait to hire Madden because they were both huge internet fans. They called Madden and flew him in from Pittsburgh to do Nitro. Tony double-crossed me too. He would always say knowledge is power, but he'd never tell you what was going on. He's a very insecure man, currently in AEW. Tony always had to have a higher chair in the middle. He told the stage hands that he had to have the middle chair higher. He would sit down and would reach for the level so he'd sink. He got mad at that when we would do that. Tony was a real minor leaguer for no reasons other than to look like the WWF. Management decided to change the look of Nitro and move us down to ringside, where, by the way, it's hotter with the lights on you. Tony decided to change his look and wear a leather jacket on the set. I think maybe he should have checked the calendar as it was July. He was soaking wet the whole night, and Schiavone doesn't keep well in warm weather. Tony has not spoken to me since I left WCW. He never said goodbye to me. He knew it was coming, but he never told me, and they weren't going to renew me. If knowledge is power, he wanted that power. And the time I worked for him, he never had me over his house once, even though we lived close to each other. I had him over to my house twice. After I was released from WCW, I was out on New Year's Eve with Tenay in Atlanta. My wife went to use the restroom downstairs. Cindy came back to tell me that Tony and his wife were at the bar. I walked downstairs and sat across the bar from Tony and just stared at him. Tony saw me, and then he would try to avoid me and avoid looking at me. Finally, he left. The next day, he told Tenay that he and his wife had to go home. They couldn't even eat because they were so upset. He couldn't figure out why I would stare at him and not acknowledge him. I told Mike what to tell him. It's obvious I can't trust you. It's obvious you don't like me. There's nothing to say, so if I can't trust you, I'm going to watch you. I ruined his New Year's. 1 week after I got sick with strep, Tony told me, you're not going to be doing Nitro. They're going to try out different guys to see how they'll work out down the road. I said, okay, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to do the pay-per-views? I figured I would ask Vince Russo. I approached him and asked him if he needed me for the pay-per-views. Tony ran up, stood right in front of me, probably winking at Russo, and Russo said, I'll get back to you on that. And he never did. About the same time, WCW was fighting a lawsuit over racial discrimination filed by a bunch of wrestlers who felt the company wasn't using enough minorities. Suddenly, they made Booker T their world champion. They had Stevie Ray do the announcing. The Cat became the commissioner. If the allegations came up in court, WCW could defend themselves by saying that they had a black world champion, a black commentator, and a black commissioner. Talk about DEI. Yeah, I said it. They took me off Thunder and had me doing Worldwide, which was taped in Atlanta for syndication. It was just a horrible show. No production values. I was doing that once a week for 40 minutes. That was fine by me. I had lost my desire anyway. I didn't want to go to Sturgis, South Dakota, and all those damn places. The pay-per-views in Sturgis were dangerous. All the bikers arrived at noon, and the pay-per-view didn't start until 7 p.m. They drank all day in the hot sun. There was no flooring, just gravel, which gave them something to throw. I did the commentary with Schiavone and Dusty Rhodes. When I walked out to the announcer's table, the people cheered me and I waved to them. Dusty nudged me and said, I thought you were a heel. Not when they have rocks and we're stationary. We waved to them, I said. All my desire was gone. I don't know if it affected my performance because I didn't know if it was bad or good. No one ever told me. We all have good and bad days. There were some matches that nobody cared about. There were some things you could just not hype. It's like a guy bringing you to an 80-year-old hooker. She doesn't look good, so why does it matter? In November of 2000, with my contract up in December, but with an option for another year, my telephone rang. They didn't even have the class to bring me in. Craig Leathers, who hired the beautiful Grey Poupon lady, called me. He said, Bobby, I have some bad news. I thought, oh no, they're going to re-up me. They decided not to pick up the option for the next year. How come, I asked. You make too much money for what you do, he said. Give me more to do, I said. There isn't anything to do. You took me off Nitro, Thunder, and pay-per-views. I shot back. You're paying 3 people to do what I did, still paying me my money. Then Craig had the balls to ask me if I would work until the end of the year. You know what I said? That's the brain. Craig, you just fired me and you want me to work until the end of the year? I'll tell you what. I've never taken a vacation in the 6 years I've been here. I have 3 coming. I'll take the first 3 weeks of December off and come back for the last week. I sure hope I'm not rusty. Needless to say, I didn't come back. They wanted me to sign a paper to get paid until the end of the year, but it said that I wouldn't knock WCW in any way or make fun of them. They sent me the paper. I sent it to my attorney. They sent me another paper that said if I didn't sign that paper and send it back, they'd consider it signed. They wanted to make up their own rules. That's how the company was run. My time in WCW was over. I wasn't worried. I had saved my money, and I always told Cindy, 2 can eat as cheap as 1 if you don't eat. Thanks for being here, fans, for story time with the Guardian of Chaos, here at Chaos Corner on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed our fireside chat, and I will be back. Go back and check out part 1 that I'm uploading now, and then I'll upload part 2. Part 1 is WWF, part 2 is WCW, with Bobby the Brain Heenan. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. Much love and respect to all you guys and gals. Come on back, 2024 is gonna be a banger. Don't you dare miss it.